Hey guys, this is John, and this is a quick tutorial on the Lucena position. So the Lucena position, which you see in front of you here, is probably the most position in all of chess theory. I don't think anyone would dispute that because it's talked about in countless books, videos, articles. It's been known for hundreds of years, yet people still make mistakes in this ending. And I must confess that I was a decent player before I knew all the intricacies of this particular ending. So the Lucena position arises when one side is on the verge of promoting a pawn. So we can see that here, white has a pawn on the 7th rank. It's one square away from being promoted. However, your own king stands in the way. That's the defining feature of the Lucena position. Your own king is preventing the pawn from being promoted. Now, this might not be a problem, but as we can see here, the white king is lacking a square to go to free up the pawn for promotion. So the king cannot go to a7 or a8 due to the black rook on a1, and likewise c7 and c8 are covered by the black king. So if you want to win this position, and this position is a win, let's be clear about that, black is not holding this if white knows the correct technique, the first thing you want to do is check the enemy king to try to create some space between the kings. So we give a check on d2. A common mistake would be rook c7 check. This does not accomplish anything after king to d8. Black is still monitoring c8 and c7, so white will have made no progress. However, giving a vertical check like this, so rook d2, is going to force the king to a suboptimal square. Black would love to play king c6 and stay close to the pawn, but that gives up c8, and the pawn is going to slip by and promote next move. So begrudgingly, black will have to put their king on the e-file. So let's say king e7. Now, a lot of players will bring out the king right away here. They say, oh, mission accomplished, let's just play king c7, get ready for the pawn to promote. But it's not hard to guess what black will do against that. Black will start delivering checks. So rook c1 check. Your opponent is not just going to sit idly by and let you promote the pawn and win the game. No, they're going to check you. And the fact that white's king has no shelter is the big problem here for white. Yes, they can dance around for a little while, like so, and maybe even have an illusion of making progress, but this king can never venture that far away from the pawn. You can see if white starts zigzagging towards the black rook, they're just going to lose the pawn. Rook takes b7 eventually. So you do not want to bring out the king too soon. There's another component that must be built into this position before we bring out the king. And that component is the bridge. Okay, so some people even refer to the Lucena position as the bridge position, maybe as a way to remember this idea. But what you want to do is play rook to d4. So you bring the rook to the 4th rank. And it should specifically be the 4th rank. I used to think it was the 5th rank, but the 4th rank is much better for a reason I'll describe in a second. So this move is mysterious, and it's not a move you would really think about if you were approaching this position cold and had never seen the technique before. But the idea is, black has almost nothing useful to do. All they can do is wait. The black king is cut off, so it can't come back to d7 or d8. The black rook, all it can really do is stay on the a-file. You could play rook c1, but that won't affect things much. So let's assume that black makes a waiting move, rook a2. Now we are bringing out the king. So king to c7. And let's say black reverts to the checks, so rook c2 check, king b6, rook b2 check. Now we're going to play either king c6 or king a6. Okay, so let's say king c6. And if black continues checking, rook c2, we do zigzag with the king to b5. But now, after rook b2, the purpose of rook d4 a few moves ago is revealed. We can play rook b4, thereby completing the bridge. We've got everything lined up on the b-file, and because we've made this bridge, I think it's more of a barrier, actually. I would prefer to call it a barrier rather than a bridge. But because we put the white rook in the way, black cannot stop the pawn from promoting anymore. So let's say black plays rook takes b4 check, king takes b4, black's king is one square too far away, and the pawn will promote and get a queen. White wins. So that is the sneakiness, the craftiness behind rook to d4. You're going to eventually use your rook to block the check on the file and act as a buffer so your b pawn can promote, or whatever pawn you're trying to promote. The reason why you do not go to the 5th rank is that it's a little bit too close to the king. And there are some variables here, but with the king on e7, rook d5 would be inaccurate because black could play king e6, and white would be best advised to move the rook again and start over. Because you can maybe think about playing king c7 and entering this endgame. Let's assume that white gets a queen here. But you don't want to have to win king and queen against king and rook. That is much harder than winning the Lucena position. Trust me. So rook d4, you want to keep that rook on the 4th rank if you were white. Obviously, if it were black trying to win the Lucena position, black had a pawn on the 2nd rank, black would use the 5th rank with their rook. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning and just discuss a couple other scenarios that may occur. So we got our starting position. We know that white is beginning with rook d2 check. We already described what happens if the king goes to c6. White will just slide over and promote. So let's say this time, instead of going to e7, black actually goes to e6. This is a sneaky idea that you might think of. The purpose being, if white plays rook d4, looking for the bridge once again, black does not intend to just wait. They're going to play king e5 and harass this rook, much like we saw if rook d5, king e6. So what can white do here? Well, one simple winning method is just rook to b4. So bring the rook over to b4. Looks kind of odd, but the purpose is we're going to move the king over in a second, and black's king is not in a position to cover both c8 and c7. If the king were on e7, they could play king d7 and do that. But here, about the best that black has is king to d6, and white is just going to slide over. So king c8, and then the pawn is promoting again. If black gives a check, we can hide in the shadow of the black king and play king d8, pawn is running on through. So you may have to adjust for certain defenses like that. So in this case, black is trying to use their king very aggressively, but keep an eye on these two squares in particular, and also where you can bring your rook to kind of cover the attacks on the pawn potentially. So if king e5, rook b4 is a nice move just to prevent black from bringing the rook over to b1, and it also supports the pawn when it's trying to promote. Another thing I wanted to mention, this Lucena position and the winning technique associated with it works for any single pawn on the board except for a rook pawn. Rook pawn is always going to be a special case. So let's say we shift everything over a little bit. Let's say we even have a position, I'll just make it this, let's say for convenience sake. So if white is trying to win this, then white would probably start with a check. So rook to c2 check. And again, black does not want to play this move because of king b8. And if rook takes a7, there's rook b2 check. So black would be forced away, this is true, but white cannot bring the king out for the same reason as described before. There's no shelter for the king, we haven't built the bridge yet. And if white does try to build the bridge, so rook c4, we see that he's not going anywhere because the king only has one avenue to get out. And this is with the rook on a1. The king can only go to b7 or b8, and if black were to simply slide their rook over to b1, then there's no way white's going to make any progress, because the king can't go to this hypothetical square on the 7th rank. So simply rook b1 is going to prevent anything that white can do here. So the rook pawn is always difficult because you're just limited. You've got only one direction you can go with your king. Whereas if we compare it, again, to our original position, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but when you're learning endgames, it's important to try the winning method or the drawing method in various scenarios. So if, let's say this occurs, white builds the bridge, and now black comes here with rook c1, much like black was doing with rook b1 in the rook pawn example, well, this isn't going to work so well. White can just go to this direction. White has that option, and it's going to be the same type of bridge building. So here, check, and eventually rook b4. So rook pawns are always difficult cases, but for any other pawn it's going to work because the king can go in either direction. In fact, in the case of bishop pawns or center pawns, so let's say we have a position like this, there's even an alternate winning method whereby you can try to maneuver the rook over to the other side, away from the enemy king. So let's say white starts with rook a2, and let's assume black just kind of waits here, rook b3. White can play this and get the rook over to b8 and then free up the b7 square for the king to come out without even having to check the king away. So that's kind of a different case, but it shows you that there are other winning plans. With a knight pawn, that's not possible, though. One final thing I was going to mention. If I were the one who was defending this position, and I was trying to be as sneaky as possible, what I would do after rook d2 check, king e7, rook d4, I would probably make a waiting move, just as we were doing originally, rook a2, let's say. And now when the king comes out, check, king b6, check, Now remember that white wants to play either king c6 or king a6. Let's say king c6. If I were defending this, I would not deliver this check, because this is pretty cooperative. If your opponent has studied the Lucena method, they're going to know about building the bridge, assuming they found rook d4. But if you think about the position right here, right after white has played king c6, white is not actually threatening anything in this position. If white got another move, they cannot promote the pawn. Black will just take it with their rook. So for the moment, black has a free move to try to do something, maybe even set up some sneaky defense. And a move I would consider playing here is king to e6. Now, this doesn't look like it has any purpose, but if white wants to build the bridge and black is being stubborn and not checking them, white might get it in their head to build the bridge on b5. So they may play rook d5, looking to play rook b5 if black is not cooperating and going to b4. But this allows black a miraculous defense. And if you'd like to pause your video and figure out what that is, you can do so now. So black to move and draw. Alright, so black can play here, rook takes b7, and the white king is overloaded. It was trying to defend both the rook on d5 and the pawn that we just captured on b7. And this will draw the game. If white gives a check here, black can just play a move like king e7, staying close to the rook. White cannot win with king and rook versus king and rook. King takes b7, king takes d6. So that's just one possible defense you can employ. It will not work, provided that white knows what they're doing here. And there's a couple ways white could win. Rook d5 is not the way to do it. White could play, for instance, rook c4, covering the c file, and then regardless of what black does, white can play king c7 and then promote the pawn next move. I think even rook d8 is going to win. Idea just to support the pawn advancing. Rook e4 check would not be a bad move too. But even though you're in a theoretically losing endgame here, as the side with black, there is some hope. You could try to set up a trick or two. So, in conclusion, the Lucena position is a win for the stronger side, the side with the pawn on the 7th rank, but you have to employ that method. And this position is important, by the way, because there are many rook endgames where the stronger side will be able to advance their extra pass pawn, but they will be hampered by the fact that their king is blocking it. Often to escape checks from earlier on, like say the pawn was back here and black's rook was kind of roaming around, the superior side will have to use the pawn as a buffer between the king and the rook to shield themselves from checks. And then they can slowly make progress like this. So just to illustrate how this position would come about, gradually the pawn is coming up the board like so. And eventually we're going to reach the Lucena position. So it's very common, can happen from a lot of different rook endgames, and that's why you have to know the proper winning technique. So, I hope this video was useful to you. If you would like to practice this endgame, I created a repertoire on my site, chessable.com.